In 1922, a quiet farm in the Bavarian countryside became the scene of one of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in European history. 6 people were murdered, but the most terrifying part of the story is what happened afterward, because the killer didn't flee into the night. For days after the murders, someone remained inside the house. They fed the animals. They cooked food in the kitchen. Smoke rose from the chimney, and someone walked through the rooms while the bodies remained inside. To this day, no one knows who it was. This is the mystery of the Hinterkaifeck murders. The Hinterkaifeck farm stood alone in the Bavarian countryside of southern Germany. Far from nearby villages and surrounded by dense forest and farmland, it was the kind of place where isolation was simply part of everyday life. The farmhouse and barn sat quietly in the open fields. To outsiders, it looked like an ordinary rural farm, but behind its wooden walls lived a family whose story would soon become a legend of mystery and fear. The farm belonged to the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, the aging farmer, lived there with his wife, Cecilia. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, also lived on the farm with her 2 young children. Alongside the family worked a maid who helped manage the household. 6 people lived on the property. 6 people who would soon become victims of one of Germany's most haunting crimes. At first, nothing about their life seemed unusual, but weeks before the murders, strange events began to unfold. One cold winter morning, Andreas Gruber stepped outside his farmhouse and noticed something unusual: fresh footprints in the snow. They came from the forest, leading toward the farm, but something about them was deeply unsettling. There were no footprints leading back. Someone had walked out of the forest and never left. Soon after the footprints appeared, more disturbing signs followed. Andreas discovered a newspaper inside the house that no one in the family had purchased. Then strange noises began echoing through the attic at night, footsteps above the ceiling, someone or something moving in the darkness. Not long after, the family's maid quit her job. She told neighbors the farmhouse was haunted. Despite the warning, a new maid arrived on March 31st, 1922. That same night, the murders began. Investigators later believed the killer had been hiding inside the barn, waiting in the darkness. One by one, members of the family were lured outside. When each person entered the barn, they were attacked. 4 members of the family died there. Inside the house, the killer murdered the maid and the youngest child. By the end of the night, 6 people were dead. But the story didn't end there, because the killer didn't leave. Days passed. Neighbors noticed something strange. Smoke continued rising from the farmhouse chimney. The animals in the barn were being fed. Someone had been seen walking near the buildings, but the family had disappeared. When neighbors finally entered the property, they discovered the horrifying truth. 6 bodies lay inside the farmhouse and barn. But investigators quickly realized something even more disturbing. Someone had been living in the house after the murders, cooking meals, feeding animals, moving through the silent rooms. The killer had stayed on the farm for several days. Police soon launched a massive investigation. Hundreds of suspects were questioned. Investigators searched the farm buildings and surrounding land for clues. But the isolated location made the case incredibly difficult. Some believed the killer had been hiding on the property before the murders. Others suspected someone close to the family. One suspect even helped search the farm, before later becoming a suspect himself. Despite years of investigation, the truth remained hidden. Eventually, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was torn down. The land was cleared, leaving nothing but empty countryside. The buildings disappeared, but the mystery remained. Who left the footprints in the snow? Who hid inside the barn that night? And who stayed inside the farmhouse after the murders? More than 100 years later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of the most chilling, unsolved crimes in history.